Here we go again. Hello there guys, what is going on? Daniel Childs back here again. Season predictions for Chelsea 25-26. It is that time of the year again. It was in August of 2014 when I started Son of Chelsea and I started to give my thoughts and feelings about the club. I may have even done a Premier League or Chelsea specific predictions at that time. And of course that was the year when Chelsea won the Premier League title under Jose Mourinho. What are my thoughts about this year? Because there is positivity, there is hope. I mean, compared to the feelings I and many others had going into last year, I mean, it is a complete reversal. Somehow, you know, it does reflect the fickleness of football and football fans. We are all fickle, obviously, but it also does reflect the positivity that has been there for Chelsea. And I think the huge question that I want to hear from you in the comments below and give me your extensive thoughts from a Chelsea perspective is, how substantial is this wave of momentum? How sustainable is it? Can this wave of positivity, momentum and good performances sustain Chelsea for the season? And I think that's the huge question for me of how high they may finish and how successful they are in this year. So just to lay out the ground rules, the things we're going to be covering in my prediction video for the season, where we will get back in May and we'll look at these predictions and how wrong probably I was about them. We're going to look at the Premier League. We're going to look at the Champions League, obviously, the Cups, my predicted player of the season, a surprise player of the season, and young player of the season. That is kind of the format, and you can take that format and give me your predictions in lists in the comments below. If you want to see my general 1 to 20 Premier League predictions show, podcast or video, that is already up. So you can go and check that out, which obviously includes, spoiler, where I think Chelsea are going to finish. And that's where we're going to start today's show. I feel a common consensus I've heard about Chelsea from Chelsea fans at kind of like peak of where we're going to go this year, if it's a really good one, is third. That is where I've placed Chelsea. In terms of what I want this season to be from a Chelsea point of view, I want it to be like 13-14. That is my strongest and easiest historical reference. 13-14 was not an amazing season in terms of silverware. Chelsea didn't win a trophy that year, but domestically in the Premier League with Jose returning, Chelsea put up, I think it was 82 points in the end. And they were only about 4 or 5 points away from Man City, who won the Premier League title. The title race between Chelsea, Man City and Liverpool went down to the wire effectively. And I think it was only like 1 or 2 games left when Chelsea were out of it. So we went into that 2014 summer, and obviously knew what we had to do. Sign a striker, sign a creative midfielder, and then of course we won the title the next year. I think that's where Chelsea should be aiming to get to by next summer. The summer of 2026 being the one where those few tweaks are what is going to hopefully get Chelsea over the line eventually in a Premier League title race. I think this year it's about cutting down the points to the eventual champions. It's a point I've made over and over again. It's one that Joe Tweeds, I've got to give him a lot of credit. I think he was the one who really, championed it or said, this is really important. And I agree with him. I looked through the gap to the points gap to the eventual champions since we last won a Premier League title. And that was, of course, all the way back in 2017. 30, 26, 30, 19, 19, 55, 28 and 15 last year. So actually credit to Maresca, Chelsea have had the lowest gap to the champions and it was last year. So maybe that will continue. But if Chelsea even want to get into a title race, you see what they have to do. We have not been in a title race for a long, long period of time. And I can't see that happening in one season. The best reference we've got of a team going from like over 20 points, like way out of a title picture to actually competing is actually Arsenal in 22-23. They finished outside the top 4 actually in 21-22, I think it was. And then literally the following season, they were in a title race. It can happen, but it means that Chelsea are going to have to wildly overperform in so many ways. And also others are going to have to underperform. All of our new signings are going to have to gel quickly. All of our best players are going to have to remain fit, which has already been an issue because we've seen Levi Colwill out for effectively the season. And, Maresca's football is durable enough with the Premier League, Chelsea with Champions League football. I'm not saying that Chelsea are going to have a good season. I think the idea of us winning the Premier League title in basically it turning round in one summer, I personally can't see it. I think what would have to happen is a lowering of the eventual champions points tally and Chelsea massively overperforming. But I think that doesn't mean Chelsea can't have a strong Premier League season, the strongest they've had for a very long time. And I think it's about that consistency. We spoke about this with John McKenzie. It's the week to week. It's the games against Burnley. It's the games against Crystal Palace. It's the games where Chelsea, the lights really aren't on, the cameras aren't on it, but it's that kind of clinical, ruthless edge of putting teams away consistently, home and away. Our away form has to get drastically better. If you looked at our away form from January to the end of the season, it was pretty atrocious. That simply cannot be the case if Chelsea want to get any closer to the top of the Premier League. So third, that's why I think it's a realistic target for Chelsea. And I think it could leave us at the end of the season feeling that if we're not too far away from who wins it, we can come back next year and make those final additions, which may actually be a centre-back and a goalkeeper to get us over the line. Champions League, the return of that anthem, the return of Champions League football in a new format for Chelsea for the first time. That's also quite exciting. We've got 8 league phase games rather than the usual 6 group games. And how Maresca, first time in the Champions League, how a lot of these young players, first time in the Champions League. And with this new format, we will see who Chelsea get in that draw. Of course, Chelsea, still coefficient-wise, are going to be in a good place. You know, in terms of, you know, they've always, even being out of it for a couple of years, we still have great, of course, European heritage. But you expect we're going to come across some teams that we wouldn't usually do in terms of quality in the usual group phase you get. And I think that is going to be of some difficulty in how Chelsea juggle Champions League to Premier League, because that is the thing that Maresca didn't have. He had the gift, especially pre-Christmas, of splitting the A and B teams. That's what we spoke about. There will be no A and B teams this year. There's going to be a mix, and dealing with that rotation is going to be vital for Chelsea's season. In terms of how far we get, I think the ceiling, or at least I think what would be a good return for our first year back in the Champions League, is quarterfinal. I always think quarterfinal is a good base level for you if you're looking to compete, because it's a knockout competition. It's not a league, and you are sometimes at the mercy of knockout draws. And you may get paired with someone literally in a round of 16 because we haven't performed that well in a league phase or as in the past as we did in the group stage. And you get knocked out in the last 16, and that happens. So you've got to factor that in. Sometimes the draw just really kills you quite early on. But I'm excited with what I see from Chelsea, and I'm excited to see them test their wits and show their quality as they did against PSG, against some of the best in Europe. So quarterfinal, I think, would be a good return, given we haven't been in this competition for a number of years. Let's look at the cups. The cups are also very difficult to predict because, again, mercy and kind of the luck of the draw, really. You know, Chelsea a couple of years ago got Man City away in the third round of the FA Cup and also the League Cup, and we weren't in a good place then to compete. So you can be knocked out of both. I do want a stronger outing in both competitions. I think Maresca has to have a stronger outing in both. That was one of the criticisms of him last year, was losing to Newcastle early on in the League Cup around October, which he kind of got away with at the time because it was a good spell, but he didn't get away with it when, we got knocked out to Brighton in February during a very difficult time. Chelsea have a great history with some of these cups, specifically the FA Cup, and that is the one I really want to target this year, because Wembley, I think I may have even said this last year, it's been a known kind of dark sort of gallows humour joke for a long period of time now for Chelsea fans. Wembley just being a very depressing place to go and watch Chelsea. We need to break that curse, and especially for the history of us with the FA Cup, it would be wonderful to go back to that stadium and finally win an FA Cup for the first time since 2018. We've had all those finals where it's gone wrong. We've had League Cup finals where it's gone wrong. Again, I think, can we compete in both? Maybe, but I think, the FA Cup for me is the one with, of course, more history and more heritage for Chelsea. And FA Cup. Let's see if Chelsea can get there in May. Now we move on to player-specific predictions. So, player of the year. It's very easy to sit here and say Cole Palmer. And if Cole Palmer plays anywhere close to his best, he will be player of the year. I probably put Moises Caicedo in the same category. I think if Moises Caicedo plays anywhere close to his best, he will be player of the season. I think they're that level of player that you just kind of have to throw your hands up and go, well, my other choice here, is kind of irrelevant because they are just so wonderful. And listen, if we're sat here with Caicedo and maybe even someone else, João Pedro has an amazing season. Esteval has an amazing season. Someone else has an amazing season. Obviously, it can change. But I felt about this player for a while now. His transformation over the past year, almost a year, when it started to turn positively for him at Chelsea, has made me think that he could have a really, really brilliant season, putting together a full run of great form rather than just like a chunk of the season, which puts you in contention for these Player of the Year awards. And that player is Enzo Fernandez. This time last year, Enzo Fernandez was I think, a very different player for Chelsea. And I think the perception of him, the criticism of him was very different. He's had off-field issues. On the pitch, there were major concerns about his form, about his fitness, about his just speed off the ball and that being a bit of a liability. But on the ball, actually not contributing enough. There wasn't enough obvious evidence of him impacting important games for Chelsea on a consistent basis. And in about October, November time last season, something starts to switch and he starts scoring important goals. He starts putting up more impressive numbers. His performances are objectively very, very good and influential. And that leads all the way to the end of the season where, of course, he's scoring the equaliser in the Conference League final, which was a massive goal in the context of that game. He scored a massive goal against Spurs. All round his leadership, I think, has really grown. And I just feel the quality of him as a creative midfielder too, but also a goal-scoring midfielder, can hopefully only improve. Again, I do think there are unfortunately players around him that if they excel, and he'll probably be creating opportunities for these players like Cole Palmer, he may, drop down. But as we saw in Moise Caicedo, it's not about being a goal scorer all the time that wins you acclaim. N'Golo Kante is another proof of this. You don't always have to be the goal scorer, the attacker, to win Player of the Year in Chelsea fans' eyes. If you are a consistent quality player and people can see your influence and fight on the pitch and the way you dictate games in what you're supposed to do, I think Enzo Fernandez could be that player for Chelsea this year. And I think he's had the time to establish himself, to settle, to get over some problems. And I think valid criticism, he's fully turned around, I think, in recent months, and now looks like the player many of us hoped he would be when we signed him back in 2023. Young Player of the Year. It's tough. I think there's a battle on for this one with several players. Part of me thinks Josh Achimpong could be this guy this year because with the Levi Colwill situation, him maybe having a breakthrough year, I think if he plays consistently, I think he will be Young Player of the Year. However, I just can't get away from, and whether this counts as whether you are specifying Young Player of the Year as in someone who had to come through our academy. If that's the case, then yeah, it's Josh Achimpong. I think it will be Josh Achimpong. But if we're talking more generally, like a player who's very young, who's come into the team on age, and this is kind of their first or breakthrough season, really, I can't get away from Esteval. I just think Esteval, it's kind of an unknown quantity, but it's an exciting unknown quantity in the sense that the ceiling could be very high for Esteval in his debut season, and it could lead him into an area where he is discussed in the same breath as Cole Palmer. But I also do think there will be periods of adaptation. There will be periods of him maybe being taken out the first team, of him having to learn the intensity of the Premier League, of him having to battle with other senior pros in the starting 11. And I just think for him, the excitement about watching him for Chelsea and those flair moments, and I think him gaining minutes and becoming a settled figure at Stamford Bridge in a new country, a new league, a new culture, a new language. These are all things we have to give grace for as a very young player. But the talent is so clearly there and the magic is so clearly there. So I'm going to say Esteval William. Surprise player. It's tough because I was actually asked about this on a Chelsea podcast I was on quite recently about the season, and it's tough because as someone, as you guys who watch and listen to this, we discuss so many of these players in extensive detail pretty much every day. So in terms of things being a massive shock, it's kind of weird to me because we analyse the player. Could a shock be a player turning around form, maybe a player putting themselves in a category of reputation that we don't expect. So let's say Robert Sanchez has an incredible season, and the form we've seen at the back end of last season through the Club World Cup into now is how he is as a goalkeeper, and he becomes the established number one. Maybe that's your surprise player of the year, but he's number one. I think he's going to be number one, and we've seen a level of performance. So I'm not going to go there. Instead, what I like to look at is players that may have a more influential role or important role for Maresca, the head coach, than we anticipate at the start of the year. And with this in mind and why I felt it was such an essential signing for Chelsea, I think Jarell Hato falls into this category. I think he could be a massive player for Chelsea this year. Not in the sense that he's going to overtake Cucurella, but just I think his versatility is massive when in a position where not only do we not have any suitable depth for Cucurella, but a left centre-back, there are concerns about what that's going to be. So if there is a scenario when Chelsea don't sign another centre-back, I could see a situation where Jarell Hato gets minutes as a left centre-back, and maybe, just maybe, because of his previous work in that role, that maybe becomes a key position for him at Chelsea. But I also just think because of the dynamic of Cucurella playing so many minutes, him probably going to have to be rested. It's great to have, I think, a profile of a player who seems to already have slotted into what's being asked of him. Just looking at him in those preseason friendlies positionally, it's like he's been at Chelsea a year. And it's a sign of not just signing anyone, it's smart recruitment based on what the head coach wants of a player. And that seamless transition, I think, is very important for Chelsea to continue their progression. You know, there's always a worry if you bring in young players, new players, they're going to disrupt things and it takes maybe a year for them to settle into the system. It looks like Jarell Hato could very quickly settle into things at Chelsea, and I think that's why he may be one of those players at the end of the season people look back on and go, he was key for us. He may not have been the guaranteed first teamer, put in some big performances when required across the course of the season. So there we go. Those are my predictions. Let's run them down. Premier League, I think Chelsea are going to finish third. Champions League, quarterfinal, win the FA Cup. Player of the year, I think, is going to be Enzo Fernandez. Young player, Esteban Willian, and surprise player Jarell Hato. In terms of a top goal scorer, that's another one that just came to mind because I know it's another one that people talk about a lot. I would love if one of the strikers a top goal scorer. I really would. But you've got to put in, you know, Cole Palmer takes penalties for us, and if he has a good, you know, non-penalty goal scoring season and he's also taking penalties, that's going to really boost up his numbers, as you'd expect. I think it's a battle between Palmer and João Pedro. Let's throw João Pedro out there. I think that'd be a great success story if we have a number 9, our striker, as the top goal scorer. And João Pedro so far can't stop scoring for Chelsea. So let's pray that continues and try and will that into existence with me making him our top goal scorer. So please do give me your Chelsea specific predictions and feelings. I will have a piece on my Substack that goes into more detail about my feelings ahead of this season, specifically about this team potentially becoming Premier League champions one day and what that means and what Chelsea have to do and all of that good stuff. So if you haven't subscribed to my Substack, please go and do so. Free to do so. It's got my written work there. My first CFC fanzine piece will be coming out this weekend. We will also have more information about my involvement in the Paul Canaville Foundation Media Partner Fantasy League, where you, of course, can get involved. I'll drop that link down in the description box below if you haven't already and are down for some FPL. In one of my upcoming videos, I reveal my FPL team. I'm a bit of an FPL amateur, or one of those guys that drops FPL, but this year I'm going to have to be committed to it. So we'll be going through my team weekly to see what's going on, and you can get involved as well in the public league that I'll leave a link in the description box below to join. So there we go. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you again very, very soon. All the best.